Welcome to Hauser Wirth. I'm Russell Salmon, Director of Public Programs here at the Gallery. It's wonderful to see you all here on this chilly day for a very special conversation between artist Catherine Goodman and writer Lynne Tillman, celebrating the opening of the exhibition Catherine Goodman's Silent Music at Hauser Wirth 22nd Street. Goodman's exhibition presents a series of new large-scale paintings where her characteristically expressive brushwork yields animated surfaces that pulse with dynamic energy. For Goodman, the studio is a place of spiritual meditation. Each painting represents an act of intimate transmutation, a way for her to turn closely held memories and personal vulnerabilities into newfound stability. Central to Goodman's artistic practice is the act of drawing directly from life, as well as an intimate knowledge of the old master painters and drawing from film. In Goodman's words, drawing can bring about a sense of unity and create a portal into other realms of consciousness. This daily practice roots her mark-making in observation and informs and enriches her paintings. If you have not yet seen the exhibition, it's definitely worth a visit. It's on view until 6 p.m. today and until Saturday, April 12th at our 22nd Street Gallery. Goodman studied at Camberwell School of Arts and Crafts, London, and the Royal Academy Schools, London, where she won the Royal Academy Gold Medal in 1987. Goodman continues in her role as founding artistic director and academic board member of the Royal Drawing School, and in 2014 was awarded Lieutenant of the Royal Victorian Order for her services in arts education. Since 2019, Goodman has served as the artist trustee at the National Gallery, London. In 2024, she was awarded Commander of the Order of the British Empire for her services to art in the UK. Today's talk also marks the release of the new monograph Catherine Goodman from Hauser Wirth Publishers, which is a richly illustrated publication focused on Goodman's recent paintings and features an illuminating essay by writer and curator Jennifer Higgie. Copies are for sale in the bookshop. Lynne Tillman's novels include Haunted Houses, No Lease on Life, a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in Fiction, American Genius, a comedy, and Men and Apparitions, nominated for a Republic of Consciousness Prize, UK 2021. Her short fiction books include Someday This Will Be Funny and This Is Not It. Nonfiction books include The Velvet Years, Warhol Factory, 1965 to 67, with photographs by Stephen Shore, and What Would Lynne Tillman Do?, a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in Criticism. Tillman has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant, and was awarded the Catherine Ann Porter Prize by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. In 2025, Soft Skull Press will publish her selected stories, Thrilled to Death, and in 2026, Zwerner Press will publish a collection of Tillman's essays on art and culture. Following today's conversation, Catherine and Lynne will be available in the bookshop to sign books. And thank you again for being here today. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Goodman and Lynne Tillman.
Have you got it? Are they on?
Is it on?
Yeah.
I feel that starting a conversation is often like starting a painting. You know, where do you begin? Why do you begin there? But I thought we could begin with drawing because it is an essential, if not the first, part of your painting. And I wondered if you could talk about that in relationship to painting, because I've looked at some of your drawings, not in person, sadly, and they're very different, of course. Are you using pen and ink or a brush or?
So I draw in lots of different mediums and always have done. If I'm working outside, I primarily these days draw with charcoal and dry pastel because it best relates to my studio practice with pre-mixed paint. So the fact that you have differentiated colors that have to limit your response is very helpful to me. And then I draw from film, as we did last night in here with a group of young artists and some friends and others, as a kind of weekly, if not more, sort of twice weekly practice, where I primarily work with just in black and white, with Indian ink and with wash. And so that's more kind of akin to a watercolor, I guess. I think what's sort of, when I often reflect about why I started a drawing school and what drawing means to me, I think it was when I first went to art school. I think there are some people, having taught drawing for 40 years, I think what I've realized is that there are some people who just make an image more naturally than they make a word, or they think in images, and so like all children, they draw, and sometimes they're lucky enough not to have been kind of repressed by some dreadful art teacher at school, and they continue to have confidence in their own ability to make an image on a page and take it somewhere, link it to a feeling and take it somewhere, and to maybe create a narrative or whatever. But when I was at art school in the kind of early 80s, there was a sort of, drawing was a sort of holy grail, and I think it was very much linked to a post-war kind of crisis for a lot of artists who'd either fought in the war or who'd come out of that trauma anyway. And it was a way of sort of saying, I am here, and because it was such a simple, direct and straightforward way of kind of announcing their place in the world. And there was this kind of slight cliche that was always bandied around about Picasso being able to draw like an angel, and when he could draw like an angel, he could then kind of take it into any direction. But it was also true. There was this incredible kind of discipline of drawing from observation that happened in art education right up until the kind of late 80s, I guess. I don't know about here, but in London. And there were very many different figurative traditions, which made it very interesting because they kind of, for me, they kind of fitted with different people's personalities. So some people wanted to work in a much more expressionistic sort of Bomberg style of drawing, like Frank Auerbach and Leon Kossoff and a lot of the people who taught me at art school. And then some were much more kind of measured and in control. And that fitted with, sorry, maybe that's a bit of a long answer.
No, it's a great answer. There are a lot of resonances in there we can go from. I was interested that you have a group that meets every week and you draw from film.
Yeah.
But as I understood it, you're working very quickly. And so you have 6 minutes for each drawing you do.
Yeah.
And I was very interested in the idea of a deadline, which many writers need in order to finish something. And so with that 6 minutes, you're working faster than you usually work?
Yeah, undoubtedly. And I think it's one of the things I've learned through teaching, I guess, is that, if it's a bit like catching a ball or something. If you think too much about it, you're likely to miss it. If just intuitively you hold your hand out, you're much more likely to catch it. And so speed is a great speed is it's a great help when you're drawing. It can also be a bit of a cop-out, but it's also a great help. And I think what I've learned with the film drawing is that you're drawing in semi-darkness, very fast, and the most extraordinary things can happen.
So you're watching a film and drawing?
So you're watching a film and you can say stop at any time. It's very playful. Anyone can say stop at any time. And we literally did it last night in here from Tarkovsky's Mirror.
You love Tarkovsky.
Yeah.
You love Tarkovsky.
I love Tarkovsky.
And I understand why. I
Yeah.
was researching him too. And he said this wonderful thing that I think really applies to what you're about as a painter. Juxtaposing a person with an environment that is boundless, collating him with a countless number of people passing by close to him and far away, relating a person to the whole world, that is the meaning of cinema. And I think in your paintings and the ones on view now, the question of relating to the world and to making one, to making a world, because I think one of the things about looking at your paintings, if you rush past them, you're not in them. And you use both a centripetal and a centrifugal kind of brushstroke. And sometimes you're tending toward the middle, and sometimes you're tending toward the corners. And I was very fascinated by that, because you have written about how it's a work of memory and a work of the moment and what you're feeling, that your moods change. You might go back to a painting later and do something quite different.
Yes, so I work on usually 4 this just occurred to me the other day when I was talking to a group of young artists, young creatives in the gallery. They were saying, why do you work on 4 paintings at the same time? And I said, I think it's because I have 4 sisters. And I'm used to living in kind of groups of we're 5 girls, but I have 4 out there that I'm relating to. I use my meditation practice and my timer when I'm working. So I half an hour bursts on each painting, and then I move on to the next one. And I find that that's a way of keeping the relationship with the painting quite fresh. You know, there was something, I always love this quote that Titian had, which is different, obviously, but he said that he turned his paintings to the wall for 6 weeks, and then he turned them around and attacked them as though they were done by his worst enemy.
By his worst enemy. Oh,
because that gives you a kind of license and agency to you know, really bring it alive again. Because so often we kill with overwork and a kind of, you know, obsessive kind of digging that can go on.
I watched a documentary of Gerhard Richter.
Yeah.
And he allowed an art student, which was unusual for him, to stand in his studio as he was working on a painting. And the painting, over time, went from black to white. It ended up being white. And Benjamin Buchloh, very well-known and very formalist critic, couldn't understand what he was doing. And he said to Richter, he said, how do you know that this is finished? How do you know it's done? And he said, I know when it's done. And that perception, I think, also happens in writing. You get to a certain point and you feel it's done. And it's not about closure.
No.
It's really about, I think, about convincing yourself that it's credible that you end here. And those kinds of, I've been in many artists' studios and seen paintings as they're being done and when they're finished. And those kinds of decisions that you're making are very interesting to me. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, if you're working on 4 paintings, when do you get to the point where you feel this is it, this is enough, and not overwork it?
So as you say, Lynn, I think there is a point where you just know, you know, intuitively that somehow, I mean, Jung talked about the feeling being the image and the image being the feeling, and at some point the sort of those two come together. I mean, I think I often hope a painting is finished. I even put it in my drying rack sometime and go, it's finished. But it's only finished when it's finished. I mean, I know that's obviously a very obvious thing to say, but it's not obvious. And often they come out again and I realize they're not, and I have to continue to work with them. It's a bit like going on a really, really long walk and feeling completely exhausted and hoping that you've got to the end, and kind of sitting down and then realizing you haven't, and it just keeps going. But you live in trust that it will at some point be finished.
I guess a very important thing right now is that you've moved into pure abstraction, let's say, and from abstraction that also was more figurative. And I wondered about that. I was thinking about Philip Guston. He did it in the opposite way, from abstraction to figures. And did you feel that making figures was limiting to you?
No, not at all. But I think, so under a lot of those paintings, there is a figurative painting, which become an abstract painting. So under a few, there are large portraits, and under a few, there are large landscapes. And they just develop, the language continues to develop and becomes an abstract painting. So they're very rooted in drawings, actually. I mean, my two studio assistants here would tell you that I had a huge head of Sam Shepard from Days of Heaven under one of the paintings, which became, I can't remember what it was called in the end. I think it was called Sam.
Unrecognizably.
Totally unrecognizable. The titles are often refer to the figurative paintings underneath. But I think I don't really see. I don't know. The more I paint, the Guston went from being a figurative painter to an abstract painter back to a figurative painter, and I think that that's a journey that a lot of artists makes, as I'm drawing figuratively every day, it's sort of I know that they're called abstract paintings, but I don't really think of them like that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, it does. It does. Maybe any viewer wouldn't understand it, including myself, but of course it makes sense. And because paint is its own language, too. And I was thinking about your language in these paintings. You're using lots of reds and oranges. And I was wondering if, when you're doing a series, let's say those four paintings, if you stay with the colors you began with.
No, I don't think I do, actually. I maybe broadly I do. I know I'm.
You can go on.
I don't think I do. I think, yeah, colour. I mean, I'm always surprised by the colour when the painting is finished, because I think colour imposes itself through some kind of emotional response, and occasionally I find, I read a lot, and I was just thinking of. I think what can be difficult sometimes is connecting to, is consciously connecting to a place that where you're very vulnerable while you're working. I mean, and I remember I was working in Somerset in the Hauser Wirth residency space. I was reading some Hemingway, and he said, write about the place where it hurts, and that really suddenly kind of opened up this huge channel for me.
You also, in terms of drawing, And I took all my electives in studio art when I was in college. And I found drawing to be extremely important. And I wish all writers would do some drawing because it really teaches you about observation, about looking, and about the hand-eye. And an important quote to you, or important person, I don't know if you knew Dick Lee.
Yeah, and he was my teacher, wonderful teacher.
But draw what you see, not what you know, is to me an absolutely fantastic thing, because what you know can limit what you see. And so let's say if you're drawing a teapot, which I did over and over again when I was in college, you stop having an idea about what a teapot should be. Now, that sounds very simplistic, but
no.
I think draw what you see has certain implications for writing.
Of course, because to be surprised by what the kind of what the world is giving us, whether it's through weather or light or mood or atmosphere or anything, it always ever changing, and then always, and that those changes go into our perceptions and observations, don't they?
Yeah, and you're a complicated artist because you're very much in your time, and also, but your sources have gone back to Veronese and Titian and to their very large history paintings. And I wondered if you would talk about when you saw those first and how they affected you.
I think so. I grew up. My mum's Russian in heritage, and I grew up in the Orthodox Church where there were these huge icons that were lit by candlelight. And so the first kind of imagery I was conscious of seeing were these kind of flickering images of the human head. You know, I wasn't really conscious of them being kind of Jesus or Mary or a saint, but these kind of extraordinary, which is one of the reasons I love Tarkovsky so much, because he too kind of talks about that, how light and that kind of very ephemeral thing of candlelight can, and I guess so many paintings were painted in candlelight and seen in candlelight, from Rembrandt and Titian and Veronese and all of them, and my mum took me to galleries when we were kids, but I wasn't really conscious of wanting to be with those paintings until I saw the Flaying of Marsyas with that late Titian painting when I was a student at the Royal Academy. And it came to London from a monastery, I think it's in Croatia, and it's the most extraordinary late Titian painting, and it had a really sort of powerful, to the extent that it changed me, you know. So it's a hideous kind of image of a man being flayed alive upside down, Marsyas, poor Marsyas. But it's the most beautiful painting, and that's this marriage of, I suppose, a bit like Bacon often talks about, this marriage of violence and beauty. But most of all, it feels alive. Well, it feels alive to me in a way that only paint can do, you know. I mean, music brings things alive in a different media, but those late Titian paintings that he painted that were going towards almost impressionism, I guess his eyesight was probably failing, but they're just so extraordinary, and then I started drawing from them, not in a way of copying them, but in a way of wanting them to be closer to them, I suppose, and to understand them, understand how he did it, you know, because because that's how we learn, really. And I went all over the world if there was a Titian show and just go and draw. Yeah, I became really obsessed with him. And then Veronese started taking over with his kind of visual tricks. Veronese is a brilliant artist to draw from. And, you know,
What were some of his visual tricks?
So he does, you know, if there's a nativity in the National Gallery where there's this dromedary's head. I mean, why there's a camel's head there anyway? You don't, and it suddenly appears. You don't see it for ages, and then like a kind of trompe d'oeil, it suddenly kind of jumps out. It's sort of, you know, there's a kind of angel, and yeah, it's hard to talk about without showing you, but when you draw from those vast paintings, you also can make an imaginative leap into them, like a kind of, and they, you know, I remember one night drawing in the big Darius in the National Gallery, and I'm lucky enough to be able to go and draw there on my own in the evening. I suddenly smelt the sea, you know, it was in Venice. And you do have those kind of very strange, rather kind of mystical experiences of believing that you're part of that reality. And there's not much painting that can do that for me now. I don't mean that I don't love contemporary painting, I do, but that, you know, you always want to know how they did it, don't you?
Your paintings are very expressive, and I wondered what you felt, or if you felt involved, let's say, or attached to abstract expressionism, and the painters of the, you know, probably starting in the late 40s and 50s, going into the 60s, and a corollary of that is, how did you experience the moment when pop art came, when Warhol? I mean, it's it was such a great divide.
Well, it had all happened kind of before I was born, really. So I guess, you know, it's like going to a party and you just kind of walk towards the people that look like your tribe. Well, not everybody does, but I do. Yeah, I've never, I mean, you know, I'm interested in Warhol, I'm interested in pop art, and the pop art in Britain had a very particular flavour with, and so an artist like Kittai, who kind of came out of it and then changed a lot, I like a lot.
Yeah.
And I look at a lot, but it's never been something that I mean, I think the way, you know, although I think I've got quite a good brain, I still am almost entirely intuitive in my response to painting, I think. And I could probably be more analytical, and it might be laziness, but it's just where I am.
Well, it would be very hard simply to be a formalist in looking at paintings of yours. I mean, there are obviously formalist elements to it, but I think what you're going for is experience.
Yeah.
The experience of being in front of that. And I think Tarkovsky, also in those amazing vistas that he makes, is wanting that experience. And I think we're heading toward the time, but I wanted to ask you something. I know David Bowie's quote on pushing yourself further, and if you feel comfortable, that's not where you should stop. Keep going. And in addition to that, there's this idea you have about the importance of failure. And those two ideas merge in my mind, and I think they are extremely important. And I know for me, in writing, I really try not to do what I did before. I actually have a horror of it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, these changes that you're making in your work could court failure, so to speak. And I wondered what happens in your studio when you feel that something is failing.
I usually, so when I remember my first day at art school, Frank Auerbach had just stopped teaching there, but there was a quote of his on the wall which said, "Make friends with failure." And that was something that I really took to heart because I found it so difficult. I found painting so difficult, and I think I've made such good friends with it now. I'm just used to it all the time, every day, and I flip a painting over and just start again, or that's.
And you always have this palimpsest of a figure beneath.
So I'm always drawing in some way, and I work a lot with a calligrapher. I teach a lot with a calligrapher, actually, who has brought a lot of. He studied in Japan and a lot of Chinese calligraphy, and he's brought a lot of metaphors and images about calligraphy into our teaching together, which he talks about a line being like a swallow's wing touching the surface of the water, and I think those images are incredibly helpful when you just begin to draw, to give yourself a sense of being able to navigate this huge space, whatever it is. It could be this big, it could be, those like.
And that idea of this.
The swallow's wing.
Reminds me of the bird dipping into the water. Reminds me that early on in your life, that you would go into I think your grandmother's garden, and it was quite a wild garden, and you would walk around, and that had, I think, a tremendous impact on your relationship to art. Yeah,
it did. We were given huge freedom to just roam, and dig and hang out in a kind of sometimes warm but mostly cold kind of. You know what England can be like. It's just muddy, kind of green-brown, but beautiful. Beautiful not in a kind of conventional sense, but I think that kind of intimacy with nature is a very private thing that a child builds if it has the opportunity to.
Yes. I wondered, Catherine, if you'd like to take some questions from the audience.
Sure. If I can answer something.
Oh.
Hi, I just saw your show, so it's very fresh in my mind, and it was very moving, so thank you for creating all of that. I'm very curious, you mentioned a little bit about your meditation process before, I think, a 30-minute timer, and then you're maybe painting. The press release also talks a little bit about it just being a meditative practice for you. I'm also a meditator, so I'm just curious if you could just tell me more about how that enters into your work, how you create, and your process.
Well, I think it's when we meditate, we're trying to let images and thoughts and everything kind of sort of skim by without taking too much notice of them, and kind of coming down to a place of kind of what they call the non-dual place, and that's very, very helpful when you're painting, to kind of let go of what I'm talking to Lynne about feelings, but also not to get preoccupied with whatever might be upsetting you or pulling you in a certain direction, because the painting is asking you to dialogue with it in a particular way, and it's difficult to talk about, but when I look at sort of Agnes Martin's drawings or something, I kind of see it I don't know, I've no idea if Agnes Martin was a meditator, but I love her drawings. But I see this place of unity, and I often find it in women's art, actually, that and it's what, and I don't know why, but I find the curtailment of time really helpful. Just as, I suppose, a whole day in the studio reaching out can be pretty, with no structure, can kind of suck you down a bit if you're in a particular headspace. So it's very useful to have something to set, just put your timer on, keep moving, give yourself a structure, have a cup of coffee when you've done 4 of them or whatever, whatever it is. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. And I felt that there was a sense of spirituality in the work, not overtly or anything, but I sensed that before reading more about your work. So I was just very curious about it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm absolutely running over to see your paintings after this talk, and I'm a journalist and an author, and I was listening to Lynne talking about how drawing would be such a wonderful thing to do. I'm absolutely wanting to do that now. But my question is about when you were saying that that a work is done. Often when I'm done with a work, I feel it's done, but then I give it to an editor who puts another eye on it, and then it eventually gets done. And I'm wondering if you have the equivalent of a reader or an editor, or do you decide you have people that you trust to bring in to look at the work and get feedback? And that sort of parallel to an editor's eye on top of what I think is finished, was often in their eye is not finished.
I think after 7 years at art school, where nothing was ever private and it was always being attacked by somebody, I became quite. I became very private about my studio and didn't want people coming in saying, "Oh, I love it" or "I hate it," because then it would restrict the journey somehow. I might become over precious with it, or. But Leon's here, isn't he? I show Leon's has been my studio assistant. I've just lost him to New York, which is really heartbreaking. But anyway, I show Leon my work, and I trust his response. But I think you have to know somebody incredibly well, and they have to not be coming with a kind of, I'm going to put this person in her place, which a lot of people do when they come into your studio. Or maybe take a piece of writing and I mean, I think that we're very fortunate not to have to give our work to editors, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. Judith's got a question.
I have a question. You said something so interesting about the Hemingway quote, "Write from the place that it hurts most," and that was very moving and revealing to you. Would you say more about that? How you get to the place, or what that means?
Well, I think we get, maybe it's my Russianness, but I think there's a sort of, I was brought up, and well, my sisters are here too, so we could all say the same. But I think in a kind of pond of melancholy somehow, and so it in a way I became sort of resistant to actually searching out any more pain, kind of thing. But nevertheless, I think at some point in the journey of making a painting, you have to go to that place, and just kind of listen to it, I suppose, and then bring what comes out of it into the work, and that can be circumstantial. It can be whatever's going on in our lives at the moment, or it can be something that's linked to memory and that awful kind of pool of trauma we all have and all those other things. But it does seem to me to be important to go there. And I've just found that Hemingway quote very helpful because it was such a kind of clear instruction. Is that enough, Judith? Yeah. We're done.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Catherine.